we're doing something. So this is a little different from our usual routine when we're in the studio, and but we do this on occasion. The remote episode when we feel so. I always call this Studio B, and we do this on occasion when we find somebody somewhere who we want to have a really, there's a reason to have a really interesting conversation. And so the way Glenn, for those following along at home, for both of our loyal fans who are curious, why are they online and who's this guy named Glenn? All right, so what happened? So we got connected because we did an episode where we were talking about, we were actually having a little fun with trying to shrink the federal budget, and the promise was, well, hey, one way we could do it is to just take all the shit that the federal government wasn't supposed to do in the first place and send that to the states where it ought to be, and then presto, the federal budget gets smaller. And so that began. I forget who was in that one, but
I think it was the one where you were talking about the word "for" or something in the.
Yeah. So what we started with, and I've been on this kick for a while, which is, and so it comes out in the commentary in various topics, which is I've been kind of on this track of, the more I think about it, the more it just seems like what they had in mind at the big founding of this country in terms of, of a national entity versus states, what they had in mind was so much different from what we have now. And whether you think about that, and the more that I think about it, the more I think, especially as I've, gotten older and in other parts of my life tried to deal with the problem of scaling and how do you solve problems on a large scale. You think, and you look at a lot of the difficulty that we're having now, whether it be the federal government's inability to provide like basic solutions, or whether you look at it more from the standpoint of overreach and they're getting involved in things that they shouldn't. It seems like I just had like this feeling, I bet that if we were, and I know the states rights versus all of these things were argued about early on, but I just came to this notion that it just seems like whatever it was they had in mind or whatever they were arguing about, even in their biggest national entity view, it was nothing like what we have today. And so that, and that keeps coming out in all my thinking. And that got us in that one episode where I said, we were looking at the Declaration of Independence, and we said, if you look at the original handwritten version, it says "for the United" is in Declaration of Independence. "For the United" is in little small letters. United is not even capitalized, and then it says "States of America" in the big letters. And so, not that means anything really specific, maybe, but it does say that what was in their heads was these are the states of America. And then you go back, you go down in the preamble or whatever it is, and it talks about, these independent and autonomous states. So we were musing on that, and you chimed in the comments in YouTube and left us what I think is our biggest, our longest comment ever. And you said, well, there's some things you got to know that come into play here. And you got into this whole thing about national citizenship versus state citizenship and what exactly did or did not happen when the 14th Amendment came along after the Civil War, which I believe in the comment you wrote, you said it was even illegally added. And I know there's some controversy around, whether the Confederate States were eligible to participate in ratifying that amendment. But anyway, you said a whole bunch of interesting things about that kind of hinged on this notion of, is there federal or national citizenship versus state citizenship? And so we said, let's do an episode or maybe a couple, but let's start with that point. So for those of us who never contemplated this, national citizenship versus state citizenship, where do you start in trying to break that down and understand it?
Yeah. So one thing, and I'm gonna hang on one second.
You got a few books there.
So yeah, I have quite a few books. So one thing is there's a key element to all of this conversation that you have to understand before you really go forward. Our founding fathers, and there's actually been computer models that they've done to compare the founding fathers' educational level to that of us today. And
I don't even want to know. I don't. It's got to be terrible.
The founding fathers, their education level was like 22 or 23 years of formal education to get to the level that they were, and they did this analyzing their writings. And our level is 5th grade. So you're talking about some extremely intelligent people that founded the country, that founded our Constitution and wrote all that stuff. Yeah. So that's something kind of you have to understand. The other thing is, if you really want to dive into this to understand what is going on, you need to actually order a set of these dictionaries. This is from 1839. You can get them; they're reprints. They're not, obviously not the originals. Now, I do have a couple original books over here. Yeah. They cost a lot of money, but they're, I've got an 1850 version of the original dictionary. But I ordered a couple of these that were reprinted because you can kind of abuse them. So if you really want to understand the Constitution, you've got to understand the language that these people used, because the words that they used back then. Yeah. Our biggest problem is we assume we know the definition of a word, when in reality we have no idea what the definition really is, and that is the, in my opinion, that is the abuse that we all ring through every single day, because we make the assumption that our public education told us what the definition of something was, and they use that against us. So when you go into court or you go into any kind of conversation talking about any of this stuff, you're playing checkers, they're playing chess, and they never told you the rules.
Yeah. Yeah. No, we've, that's come up before. I mean, even if you go and look at the dictionaries from when, I feel like we're probably in a similar age group. When we were kids, if you look at those dictionaries, or even the dictionaries from the 70s and 80s, or that would be when I was a kid, the words have changed. Like, the meanings of words have changed since then.
But it's worse than that. It's not even that. So the thing that you have to understand is the definitions that you use in common language and the definitions that you use in law are completely different things. Right. And so we operate in the real world with communicating with other people. And so we have our understood definitions of these words. But when you get into the law, the legal aspect of it, these words are completely different meanings. And I'll give you examples as we go through this, because it's quite eye-opening when you stop making the assumption that you understand what I'm saying and you actually go look up the definition. It's yeah.
And so your premise is these guys, because of their education level and because of their time period, the definitions, what was clear to them when they said a word, something very different than what we got.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Okay. I'm gonna try to let's see if we can figure out how to share my.
I think you can do that. By the way, I forgot to mention that we don't got to know your life story or anything, but your this is kind of a passionate hobby for you, right? So I mean, you're not working in this field in any like official capacity, but you've been researching this stuff for a long time and kind of I kind of took this thing on because of some altercations that I got into with some sovereign citizens and the fact that I couldn't really get the information that I was looking for. And so I kind of took it upon myself to just go do the research on my own. Sure. I've read, this is not even all of the books behind me. I've read a lot of books. I read every single day. In fact, I'm reading a book on property right now. But I'm kind of, once I got the premise of the problem, which was the fact that we're all being lied to, not openly, but through these hidden definitions that we never actually spent the time to go look up, it kind of woke me up to all kinds of different things. And so
I don't have an opinion one way or the other. I just want to know what the truth is. I want to know if legal has specific meanings and they portray what we're being judged on and what we're being, taxed and everything else. I want to know what those definitions are. I want to fully understand what these codes say. And I think when I'm done here in a little bit, you're going to want to go do the same thing, because it's pretty eye-opening when you get down to it. So what I'm going to do here, let me get my screen set up here a little bit better.
This already looks intense, by the way.
Yeah. Well, so what I did, and I want to preface this with something. So I have one rule that I have in anything. So I use an application called Obsidian that I use to track all of my notes. And if you do a little research on it, it is the only way to research something, because it allows you're basically creating index cards on books and topics and definitions and all that. And then you can link all these things together and organize them in any way you want. So what I want to show you before I get into this little presentation is up here under politics. I've got the Bill of Rights and the Constitution, that kind of stuff, but you'll see code sections for states and code sections for the United States. So all of these things are all sections. They're all subjects that I have been researching. And so when I go and I find a code section that is related to a certain topic, I'll link it into my notes. So my rule, though, is that if I cannot physically find a copy of something that I read in a book or that that somebody has told me, I don't put it in here. And if I do put it in here, I'll put a reference in there that I can't verify what this is actually saying. This is a quote that I got, but it's not. I can't find the original source for this. So, and all of my notes are online. So I'm not only doing all this research on my own, but I'm sharing it with anybody that wants to actually go and look at it. And I can get you a link to the actual site.
So there's some quality control that's going into this.
I'm very, and to be honest with you, it causes me a lot of trouble, because when I'm reading these books, and for example, there's a lot of people that want to talk about how all your names, if you look at your driver's license and your loan papers and your bank account and your social security card and all of the things that deal with the government, you'll notice that your name is in all capital letters. And everybody says that proves that, that you're actually a fiction and you're not actually a real human being and all this stuff. I don't personally believe that.
I haven't heard that one, but yeah, okay.
Yeah, well,
because it's in capital letters.
It is a huge conversation. In fact, I am literally the only person that does this research that disagrees with that statement. And the reason I disagree with it is I've found zero evidence to support it, but I've found other evidence to support what they're doing, which accomplishes the same thing. So it's kind of pointless. Like my position is I don't care if they put my name in all capital letters. I want to know what's behind it. What are they doing to me that may or may not be correct? That's what I'm interested in. I don't care about my name's capitalization.
I always assumed that was just because of like the old computer systems from the 70s.
So I'll tell you and we're kind of getting off subject, but one of the things I did is I went back and looked at driver's license from all the way back in the 1920s. And then I worked my way up to today. And what I found was in the early days, they were using upper and lowercase letters, but it's all typewriter. There are no computers back in the 20s. Right. So it was all typewritten. And what I noticed is that pretty quickly they started all capping everything. And, to me, they do it because it's easier to find something when all the letters are consistent. Like I know from computer, I'm a software engineer. So I'm back in the 80s when we were writing database programs. all of the databases were case sensitive. So if you put somebody's name in SM with a capital S and lowercase m, and then put another person in with capital S, capital
Different
M,
value.
you didn't find them. Like they were two totally. So a lot of computer systems just automatically started capitalizing everything to make it easier to find later. So there's a lot of, disjointed conversations about that topic. And my point is that I don't really get tied up in that conversation because you can't prove it. So if you can't prove it, you can't give me legislation or give me some English vocabulary rules and grammar that says that this is what this means, then I'm not going to buy into it. So, and the only reason I'm bringing this up is I try to make my notes that I'm taking pure fact. Like if I can't back it up, it's not in here. Usually I'll store it somewhere else and research it more later, but
got it.
So the first thing that I want to cover here, and this is just a very broad statement, but do not ever, if you're doing anything with the Constitution or you're doing anything with legal or the law, whatever, however you want to verbalize it, do not ever assume you know the definition of something. And when we get through here, you're going to find out that it goes so deep that you literally cannot assume you know the definition of anything. So if a code section in any of the codes supply you with a definition, then you have to use that definition. If they don't supply you with a definition, then you go to Black's Law to find if there's a definition there. You don't use your common idea of what that word means unless you can't find the definition anywhere in the legal code. And that's a rule that you just have to accept right off the bat. So definitions are everything. So the first thing I want to do is we've got to talk about jurisdiction before we can really get into the whole conversation about 14th Amendment is citizenship at all. You have to understand the fact that the federal government has literally zero jurisdiction inside of any union state in this country. So you have to understand that the federal government does not have jurisdiction inside of a state unless that state has allowed them to come in and do something. Okay. So as an example, the county sheriff does not have to allow an FBI agent to come into the county to harass a citizen in the county. They don't have to allow that. They can tell that FBI agent to remove themselves from the county and they have to leave. Another example is think about a county sheriff going on a military base and arresting somebody. He can't do that because he doesn't have jurisdiction inside of a federal area. Okay. So you have federal areas that are the District of Columbia, Puerto Rico, basically any military base, post office, bank, or courthouse that is a federal entity. They have their own jurisdiction, and it requires some type of an agreement between the county and that agency or that building or property for them to go back and forth. So what we're going to talk about first is where does that come from? Like, how do you define what this federal area is to be able to understand these jurisdictions? And so the first thing I want to start with is Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution is where you get all of the things that the federal government has the ability to do. This gets into post offices. It gets into money. It gets everything that the federal government can do is listed inside of the Constitution. So let me pause you because it's an interesting thing that you just brought to light, which is I think most people would think of federal jurisdiction. They think of it in kind of the natural way that you would think of it, which is that it's like an overlay, right? Like, and if you watch TV or you watch movies or whatever, and some FBI guy in a TV show says, well, we work for the federal government, so the whole country is our jurisdiction. I think the way most people think about it is like it's an overlay. Like, okay, well, the state's, the county's jurisdiction is within the county, and then the state has jurisdiction over the whole state, which is all the counties, and then the federal is over everything. And so what you just said is it's actually not like that at all. It's opposite of that. Yeah. It is total opposite of that. So, and I'll prove it. So why do you have constitutional amendments if the federal government already has control over the whole country? Because all they'd have to do is pass a law and all the states would have to go follow it.
And part of what you said a minute ago, Glenn, reminds me of, if you read Frederick Bastiat in The Law, where he describes the fundamental purpose of the law, and so therefore the government is really just to protect, to keep people from doing things to each other that threatens each other's life, liberty, or property. And then pretty much everything after that is not really.
It's ours. It's our response. We're supposed to be taking care of our own welfare and our own medical and our own.
Which
it's not supposed to be the job of the government to educate our kids. So that's all stuff the government has provided to us to take advantage of us. It's not something they did because they thought they were helping us. Yeah. So it's not an enumerated power. It's not something that we gave them the ability to do. They just did it. Yeah. So, but here's the main thing. I'm going to skip through all the things because this is all the Article 1, Section 8 lists all the powers the federal government has. Okay. Right. But what I want to focus on is down here on Clause 17 and 18. The thing you have to understand is the District of Columbia is a 10-mile square area, and the Constitution is what actually created that. So again, the federal government did not exist until the Constitution got written and laid out for what its enumerated powers are going to be and where it's going to be located and how it's going to function. But the key element to understand here is Clause 17 says to exercise exclusive legislation in all cases whatsoever over such district. And it said, and it goes on, not exceeding 10 miles square, as may by session of particular states in the acceptance of Congress become the seat of the government of the United States, and to exercise like authority over all places purchased by the consent of the legislature of the state in which the same shall be, for the erection of forts, magazines, arsenals, dockyards, and other needful buildings. Okay, so there's your courthouses, your military bases, all that stuff. Right. So what this clause is saying is that the federal government has exclusive jurisdiction over that area, which means that when they pass a law inside the District of Columbia, it doesn't have to abide by the Constitution. That's why they can tell citizens up there that they can't have guns in D.C. because they don't have constitutional restrictions within D.C. That is their world. It's their state. Now, it's not a state of the union, but it is called a state, and you'll actually see this in a minute. But it's something that you have to understand. They have exclusive jurisdiction over every federally owned or operated area or building in the entire country. They have that control, but they do not have the ability to come inside of a state and dictate what that state's going to do. That's where your constitutional amendments start to come in. Because if the federal government wants all states to do something, then they have to pass the constitutional amendment and have all the states agree that they're going to allow the federal government to do whatever it is that you're amending the Constitution to allow. Right?
Yeah, I'm following you. So, and the first thing that struck me when you pulled this up I've seen this before, but I never really thought about enumerating the federal government's powers or abilities is a list of 18 things. That's not a very long list. So even without reading it, there's only 18 things here. That's it.
Right. I mean, when you get down to it, the Constitution is an incredible document because it actually created an entire government to regulate all this federal stuff. And it's like, 3 pages long, 10 pages long. So it's really an interesting document when you get down to it. And it's and for those that are out there that want to say, but the Constitution is they don't pay attention to the Constitution any longer. They're doing their own thing. My response to that is that that's not true at all. Every single federal code and every single state code that gets passed has to work around this Constitution. You're going to see this in a minute when we get into the code sections. But it's really important to understand there is an absolute, there is no merging. There is an absolute separation between state and federal. If you think about it, why do you have state laws? Why do you have state courts? So citizens of a state are responsible for that state, not like Alabama can't come and charge me for a crime that I created, that I did something in Georgia, but it's illegal in Alabama.
Yeah.
Alabama and Georgia are completely isolated from each other. Their laws do not apply to each other. So the federal government's exactly the same thing. Okay.
Yeah,
but the federal government hears cases where, for example, I sue my state. Well, obviously, I can't hear my case in the state of Georgia because they're party to the problem, right? It would be an unfair case. Well, that's where it would go directly to the federal government. That's what the Constitution actually lays out, exactly how all that stuff works.
Gotcha.
Okay. So let's actually hang on.
But an interesting thing. So we kind of got off, but you were saying that, but inside the place where there is federal jurisdiction, which is what we now know as the District of Columbia, and any federally owned facilities outside of that, in that specific area, they actually have the freedom to do whatever they want.
Exactly.
Because the Constitution really defines what they're able to do relative to the states.
Right. And it even lists why, because the federal government has to interact with other countries. And if they had the restrictions of the Constitution holding them down, they wouldn't be able to sign treaties and other things with other countries. Right. So, but Clause 18, very quickly, to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers. In other words, they can do anything they want. They don't have to abide by the Constitution if they don't want to within DC. They can do anything they want there. Okay. So it's important to understand that, because once you understand that, then you're going to understand how they're getting around all of our rights. Because it's trickery at every level, but it all comes back to those definitions. So let's go on to the next point. So jurisdiction, I just covered a little bit of it in Article 1, Section 8. This is actually the jurisdiction, or the book that all the attorneys and courts use to kind of help understand the court system. This is I just want to read through this real quick. Private international law assumes a more important aspect in the United States than elsewhere, for the reason that the several states, although united under the same sovereign authority and governed by the same laws for all national purposes, embraced by the federal Constitution, again, it's a federal Constitution, are otherwise, at least as far as private international law is concerned, in the same relation as foreign countries. In other words, Alabama and Georgia, we think of them as states, but what is the difference between France and England, or France and Germany? They're different countries, but they're both part of the European Union, right? But they're states. If you look up the definition of a state, actual definition of a state, the state and country is very, it's kind of fluid. It's hard.
Sovereign. So you hear sovereign state, right?
And so they are sovereign.
There were city states, right? There were city states, and then there were nation states, and then there were But a state is, the way I've always understood it is, if you leave out the concept, the specifically American, U.S. notion of the state of Alabama or the state of Georgia, a state in sort of the world politics is an independent, sovereign entity of some sort.
Correct.
Right.
And the state of Alabama absolutely is, and the Constitution actually says it. We'll be getting into that.
Well, it says it even in that first part of the Declaration of Independence that we looked at on the previous episode. It says independent and sovereign states. Now, somebody in some other YouTube comments spit out something, said, yeah, but it's just a Declaration of Independence. It was just a declaration. It wasn't a binding document yet until we came along later with the Constitution. So,
but it's irrelevant. You'll see how all this plays out. The Constitution covers us. There's no, I don't read the Constitution and think, oh man, they should have done this. But it's a pretty all-encompassing document, because the thing you have to understand is that it is not restricting the federal government. In other words, it doesn't say that the federal government cannot do this and they cannot do that. Now, the Bill of Rights kind of covers some protections that you have, but the understanding that you have to have for the Constitution is what it has done is enumerated the things the federal government can do, not the things they can't do.
Yes.
So when you understand that, and then you look at what the federal government's doing, then your immediate question is, how are they doing that? And I'm going to answer that question here very shortly.
Yeah, fair. Right.
So,
and you said something before, which was that, so the common, the common notion on that among people who comment on such things is that, to the question of, well, how are they doing the things that they're doing if the Constitution only enumerates a few? And the thing that everybody says is, oh, well, they're obviously not following the Constitution.
But that's not true at all.
And what you discovered is they actually are following it perfectly. So, okay.
Yeah. They're not following it. They're following it to a T, and you'll understand that if you remember clause, Article 1, Section 8. So just to finish this off, the great majority of questions of private international law are therefore subject to the same rules when they arise between two states of the Union as when they arise between two foreign countries. And in the ensuing pages, the words state, nation, and country are used synonymously and interchangeably, there being no intention to distinguish between the several states of the Union and foreign countries. Okay.
And where is this from? What are we reading here?
This is the jurisprudence, American jurisprudence, 16 American jurisprudence 2D. I don't remember if I got, and again, this is a quote directly out of that book. So this isn't any of my language here. But I don't even
right there though.
And again, this is a book that all the judges and all the courts use. So it's not something that, is some obscure thing. They actually still print this book. So let's look at, this is actually a court case. So this is Albeman versus Booth. This is from 1859. It says, no judicial process, whatever form it may assume, can have any lawful authority outside of the limits of the jurisdiction of the court or the judge by whom it is issued, and an attempt to enforce it beyond these boundaries is nothing less than lawless violence. Okay, so this is just a comment about jurisdiction. You have to have jurisdiction, or whatever you're doing is unlawful. It's not legal. Yeah. All right, so this is Dred Scott versus Sanford.
Famous, right? Yeah.
Yep, yeah. And so it says the Constitution of the United States operates alike in all the states, and one state has the same power over the subject of slavery as any other state. The United States have no constitutional capacity to exercise municipal jurisdiction, sovereignty, or eminent domain within the limits of a state or elsewhere, except in cases where it is delegated. And the court denies the faculty of the federal government to add to its power by treaty or compact. In other words, in this case, the court was ruling that the federal government couldn't just assume power within a state. The state had to either give it to it, or, it had to do something. The federal government couldn't just give itself powers, because the Constitution has enumerated the things that the federal government has the capacity to do, and none of them give it the ability to operate inside of a state. The state has to, it can purchase land inside of a state and therefore regulate that property, but it cannot come into a state and just arbitrarily say that, hey, we're taking over this particular activity. And gun ownership or whatever the heck you want to throw out there, or the federal government cannot do that.
Or like all this fun we have in Texas right now, where the threat to nationalize the Texas National Guard, federalize the Texas National Guard. If they won't stop blocking the Border Patrol from.
Yeah, and that is absolutely not something the federal government has the ability to do. And in closing, in this particular thing, it says, in the circuit courts of the United States, the record must show that in the case is one in which, by the Constitution and the laws of the United States, the court had jurisdiction. And if this does not appear, and the judgment must be reversed by this court, and the parties cannot be waive the objection to the jurisdiction of the circuit court. So this case had a lot of good stuff in it. But the primary thing that I'm kind of focusing on is the fact that, in just this last sentence, a free Negro of the African race whose ancestors were brought to this country and sold as slaves is not a citizen within the meaning of the Constitution of the United States. Now, again, this is from 1856. So this is prior to the Civil War, right. But it was, it's a legit case.
And Dred Scott was the one where the guy was suing because his former owner had taken him to a free territory, right? And that was a famous case.
Yeah. So New Orleans versus United States, special provision is made in the Constitution for the cession of jurisdiction from the states over places where the federal government shall establish forts or other military works. And it is only in these places or in the territories of the United States where it can exercise a general jurisdiction. So there's a Supreme Court case where they are admitting that the federal government does not have jurisdiction inside of a state or inside of anything other than a federal area. Okay. So here is U.S. versus Speckler. And I need to put years on these. I get in a hurry going through some of these and forget to put stuff.
Sloppy work, Glenn. I hope that I expect that you're going to clean it up.
Canon of construction, which teaches that legislation of Congress, unless a contrary intent appears, is meant to apply only within the territorial jurisdiction of the United States. Again, they can pass whatever law they want to, but the assumption is it only applies inside of the federal areas. It doesn't apply anywhere else.
So the thing that I think the point that you're getting to here is, if we just leave out whatever it was that they were trying to make a decision about, whether it was the slavery thing, right, or whether it's whatever these, it's what we're looking at right now isn't the debate over whatever the thing was. We're finding examples of clearly there was this notion of a federal jurisdiction that didn't just overlay everything.
Right. And hopefully I'm making that case.
Clearly. I mean,
so the last thing I want to talk, and again, I want to point something else out. I picked 5 cases to put in here. I've got 50. Yeah. I mean, I've got so many I would bore you to death if I went through all of them. So this one says the rights of the individual are not derived from governmental agencies, either municipal, state, or federal, or even from the Constitution. They exist inherently in every man by the endowment of the Creator and are merely reaffirmed in the Constitution and restricted only to the extent that they have been voluntarily surrendered by the citizenship to the agencies of the government. The people's rights are not derived from the government, but the government's authority comes from the people. The Constitution, but states again these rights already existing, and when legislative encroachment by the nation, state, or municipality invade these original and permanent rights, it is the duty of the courts to so declare and to afford the necessary relief. Okay, so it's just again a point that jurisdiction is real. And you have to if you do not understand jurisdiction, you're never going to get what I'm fixing to cover. Yeah. So I just want to kind of point out that is a real thing, and it is the most important thing for you to understand.
Yeah, it's really, and it is so different from. So the more we look at these individual references, there's no concept of the federal government being overlaying everything else and having sort of a the inheritance doesn't come down, it goes up, right?
Correct. I mean, think about it this way. If the federal government had the ability to regulate any of the states, it could have just said slavery is illegal.
Right.
It couldn't do that. It had to go through constitutional amendments for that to become law of the land.
Fair. Yeah,
sure. So just by that one example, you can pretty much prove that they don't have jurisdiction over anything.
Why would they take the long way around the barn if they didn't have to.
Right. All right. So now what I want to talk about is what is the United States? Because this is something when somebody asks you if you're a citizen of the United States, you should never answer that question. You should make them provide you a definition of what they mean by the United States before you answer that question, because I'm about to prove something to you that is mind blowing. This is probably the most important thing that you can understand for the trickery that we're all faced with in state and federal laws. All right, so this is Alice and Company versus EVAT. This is a 1945 case, and it says the term United States may be used in any one of several senses. It may be merely the name of a sovereign occupying the position analogous to that of other sovereigns in the family of nations. It may, this is the important, it may designate the territory over which the sovereignty of the United States extends. All right, so again, the United States, the federal government, does not have jurisdiction over the whole country. They do not have jurisdiction in the state of Georgia, Ohio, Mississippi, any of them, okay? Only in the federal areas. So if I talk about something having to be under the jurisdiction of the United States, it cannot be talking about the whole country, because there is no jurisdiction that covers the whole country. You have state jurisdictions all over the place, and you have a federal jurisdiction in federal areas. You do not have any jurisdiction that would just automatically cover you no matter where you're at in this country. Okay, so it's jurisdiction is everything. If you don't grasp the jurisdictional conversation, you're not going to grasp the rest of what's going on.
So let me pause you for a second. Would that mean that, let's say, because I'm trying to reconcile this in terms of what I understand about, let's say like federal law enforcement. And so murder is illegal. I'm just taking an extreme example.
That's a common law. Keep in mind that some of the things that you're about to name are common law.
Oh, that's true. Let's get away from that. So let's get something that wouldn't be. So let's say, here you go. Here's a court case that's about to be in the news, or is in the news. The federal ban on home distilling. So, and there's somebody who's challenging that right now. But so if it's against the law, if based on what you're saying, if a state said, well, federal, home distilling is not illegal in Texas, then the federal government would not be able to arrest you for that.
They cannot. If the FBI showed up inside of the county where you're distilling, and your sheriff, because they're going to have to go to the sheriff first. They cannot come into that county without asking the sheriff or notifying him that they're coming. If the sheriff says, look, in the state of Mississippi, that's not against the law down here, so don't come down here messing with any of our citizens or I'll arrest you. So if he actually stood up, that is illegal, okay? It is illegal still if you handle yourself properly. And I don't want to get into this in this video because we'll go on forever. But just understand jurisdiction. The federal government can pass any law they want to, and they can enforce that law in federal areas. But they cannot come into a state and enforce that law.
Yeah, so this explains
the thing that's happening is our sheriffs don't understand the Constitution. They don't understand jurisdiction, and they're allowing the federal agencies to come down here and do stuff that legally they cannot do.
But this is why. So this actually clarifies two things in recent memory. I'm thinking about the legalizing marijuana laws in the states, and I'm thinking about the mask mandates, and this is why we were still forced to wear a mask in an airport or some sort of federal at the post office or what have you, even though we were living in a state that didn't require it.
Correct.
And it also is why, and I remember when the whole marijuana thing, states are legalizing recreational marijuana use, and the media didn't really know how to explain it. So the way that they explained it was, well, it's still illegal at the federal level, but the federal government is just deciding they're not going to do anything about it if the state has legalized it. The fact is they couldn't do anything about it.
They can't. No,
Yeah.
they never could. The federal government can't. They can do whatever the hell they want to in D.C., but they cannot tell the states what they're going to do unless they pass a constitutional amendment restricting the state from some activity, which they've done. I mean, think about alcohol. They actually passed a constitutional amendment outlawing. Well, why did they do that if the federal government could have just outlawed it? So, it required a constitutional amendment.
Nobody in the media knew how to explain that. Like the whole marijuana thing.
I don't think you could find a politician that could. It's really, I mean, when you really get into this, it becomes very embarrassing how little we know about how our country is supposed to function. Like even the politicians and lawyers, they have no idea what, I can't, I've even offered to pay attorneys that whatever the hell their rate is to have a conversation with me about the Constitution to see if I'm misunderstanding. This was early on. I couldn't get not a single one of them to, some of them were charging me $500 an hour. They wouldn't sit in a room with me. Like they can't, every single one of them canceled the meeting when they found out it was about the Constitution. So that ought to tell you something about, our legal system. And you're going to understand this more here in a minute because it gets extremely damning. Yeah. All right. So let's get over. I'll just jump through some of these because the code themselves is going to kill this whole thing. So this is Caja versus United States. This statute is one of universal application within the territorial limits of the United States and is not limited to those portions which are within the exclusive jurisdiction of the national government, such as the District of Columbia. Generally speaking, within any state of this union, the preservation of the peace and the protection of persons and property are the functions of the state government and are not part of the primary duty, at least of the nation. The laws of Congress in respect to those matters do not extend into the territorial limits of the states, but have force only in the District of Columbia and other places that are within the exclusive jurisdiction of the national government. So again, all I'm doing is pointing out that I'm not making this stuff up. The Supreme Court has ruled on all of this.
So that says you can't. So that says the federal government can't actually make a law that has jurisdiction and
then try to enforce it inside of the limits of the state. They can make the law, but they can't.
Well, okay, but here's then why have such an elaborate legislative branch of the federal government?
Because when I'm done here, I'm gonna blow your mind because this is much deeper than what I'm.
Right? It's like why in the hell do we need this humongous machinery of the House and the Senate and all the gyrations and everything else if all they can really do is make laws that affect people?
Well, you got to understand though. Their job is to interface with the rest of the world. And they were never supposed to be in session 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 24 or 12 months out of the year. They were supposed to be in session 1 month out of the year. So they've turned this into an occupation instead of what their primary duty was, which was to interface with the rest of the world and to manage interstate commerce where the states may have, some issue with selling products or moving products between different states where the federal government needs to get in and regulate that type of activity because they do have the ability to regulate commerce. Interstate commerce, not within the state, but interstate commerce. So there are functions that the federal government is supposed, and the reason you have this elaborate system with all of the republic is that they wanted the ability to make sure that the people that were actually making the decisions were smarter than the general populace that would be voting democratically, because democracy is nothing more than socialism. And socialism is nothing more than communism. It's all the same thing. You're voting by the masses. And the problem with the vote by the mass is what you actually end up doing, and Hitler actually covered this quite well, what you actually end up doing is making giving the politicians an excuse to do anything they want because all they have to do is make the claim that the people want this, right? Yeah. And so now they don't have to be intelligent. They don't have to have any ideas. And that's where we're at today. Yeah. They think, and all you got to do is listen to the media, they think they're in a democracy. And that is treasonous. That, in my opinion, them thinking that they're in a democracy is the root of half of our problems.
And convincing everybody else that that's what we're in. And in fact, and that I did know is if you look at a lot of the writings and the debate, and I haven't done anything like the type of analysis that you've done, but just a cursory look. Clearly, the founders were concerned about. They wanted to avoid direct democracy, which amounts to mob rule, right? Because you can manipulate the mob, and so in Athens, in Athenian democracy, it didn't work out very well, just because you find out that most of the people aren't.
What's a whim? It's a whimsical
right.
environment, because how do the people feel next week?
Yeah,
I mean, they're
right.
constantly changing the rules, and you can never, it's ridiculous.
Yeah. So okay, all right, let's go. Let's move
All
on.
right. So this is First National Bank versus Yankton. It says it is certainly now too late to doubt the power of Congress to govern the territories. There have been some differences of opinion as to the particular clause of the Constitution from which the power is derived, but that it exists has always been conceded. The act to adapt the ordinance to provide for the government of the territory northwest of and this is back in, I can't remember the year, but this is early on. The territory northwest of the River Ohio to the requirement of the Constitution is Chapter 8 of this section, and the ordinance itself was in force under the Confederation when the Constitution went into effect. This is the key part. All territory within the jurisdiction of the United States. Now, this is the first clue of what's fixing to take place. And this is where they tricked all of us, because we thought the United States was the whole country. But I want you to pay attention to what they're saying. All territory within the jurisdiction of the United States. That can only be the District of Columbia. That's the federal government. Okay. And it says not included in any state must necessarily be governed by or under the authority of Congress. Congress only has the ability to govern what is within the territorial jurisdiction of the federal government. But they called it the United States because what has happened is, and the Constitution actually started to do this as well. In the beginning of the Constitution, you see where they use the word United States. But when they used it, they were using it, you could kind of flip it around and say States United, right? They were talking about the whole country, all of the 13 states when they formed this thing. So they were using it in that sense. Yeah, but it's an adjective. As soon as they create the federal government, they start referring to the federal government as the United States. Okay, so that's something that you need to keep in the back of your head, because in all this is going to make total sense in a minute.
So one thing here on this bit too. So what I'm reading here, or what I'm interpreting, is that, and because this was back, this case, First National Bank versus Yankton, was back prior to when we still had territories that weren't not yet states, right?
Yeah, so even Alaska and Hawaii weren't that long ago.
So it appears to me here that what they're saying is, to reinforce the point, is now the federal government Congress has the power. If we've got any territories that haven't become states yet, then fine. There's nobody else to regulate that or to govern that except the federal government. But once they become states, now
they take on their own sovereignty.
Right? Yeah.
Correct.
So the fact
and that's a key. Yeah, that's a key point you've got to understand. So let me see if there. So it says the territories are but political subdivisions of the outlying dominion of the United States. Their relation to the general government is much the same as that which countries bear to the respective states, and Congress may legislate for them as a state does for its municipal organizations. Right. The organic law of a territory takes the place of a constitution as the fundamental law of the local government. It is obligatory on and binds the territorial authorities, but Congress is supreme, and for the purpose of this department of its governmental authority, has all the powers of the people of the United States, except such as have been expressly or implicated or by implication reserved and in the prohibitions of the Constitution. So in other words, the federal government can only regulate within a territory that they are in charge of, that they have jurisdiction over. Okay.
Yeah. So the federal government is when you got a territory that's not a state, then the federal government, it's interesting because it said there, It doesn't compare the state function to the federal function. It compares the federal function to the state. In other words, it says, so in the absence of a state government, then the federal government steps in and does the thing that the state would do,
Right.
which implies that it's something that the federal government ordinarily doesn't do, except for when it needs to, because there is no state.
Right. And when they do that within that territory, they're kind of restricted by the Constitution. They're supposed to follow the Constitution at that point. Now, I'm not going to spend any time on this, but I wanted to throw this in here about the capital letters that we were talking about early on. This is actually a case where the court, and it's Eisenberg versus Commercial Union Assurance, 189F 500. This is a 1960 case, and it's actually worth reading because the court went into a lot of deliberate language in here about the all cap names and some of the language that they use related to that. But it just real quickly, it says it is to be noted that the statute difference between states of the United States and foreign states by the use of a capital S for the word when applied to a state of the United States, subdivision C, therefore in dealing with a place of incorporation. So it's talking about to a business that's incorporated in one state, operating in another state. And so what it's doing, and this is something that you have to understand, is in law or in legal, capitalization is extremely important.
Yeah,
like
sure.
You don't assume something like you think maybe they made a mistake or they just capitalize here. That's what we do.
Right.
In law, they are very deliberate on how they write things. Okay, and so as an example, I'm only going to tell you this, but I'm not going to prove it to you, but you can prove it to yourself if you actually go look. In the Constitution, you will notice that the word state and the word citizen are always capitalized throughout the entire Constitution and the Bill of Rights. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. The reason is because they were treated as proper nouns because they were who were writing the Constitution. Okay. Yeah. So when you write something and you write the word I, you capitalize it. Well, in the case of the Constitution, the citizens and the states were the ones that were developing this Constitution, and therefore they capitalized those words throughout the entire document. But do you know when they stopped doing that? The 14th Amendment. 14th Amendment. Yeah. So when you got to the 14th Amendment, from that point on, you never got another capital C for citizen. They were all lowercase c because they weren't privy to who created the Constitution. They were actually federalized. And I'm going to prove this to you here in a moment. So
I can vouch, by the way. So I in other parts of my life, I have done a lot of contract work, and even in just regular, even in basic contract work, you have to be very careful about anything that gets capitalized usually has a particular definition, right?
Yeah. All right. So now what I want to do is I want to dive into the actual code sections that you think you're responsible for following. Okay. This would be income tax code. This will be all kinds of different related things. Okay. We'll kind of focus on income tax because everybody is involved in income tax. And so what I want to do is kind of look at some of the definitions to prove this jurisdictional conversation. Okay. Gotcha. So 8 U.S.C. 1401, nationals and citizens of the United States at birth. Okay. So just looking at this seems to be what they take a illegal immigrant that comes into our country. They have a baby here and it instantly becomes a citizen of the United States. Okay. Right. I argue that is treasonous and it is an absolute fallacy. Okay, and I'm gonna prove this in just a second. Okay. So the following shall be nationals and citizens of the United States at birth. Okay, a person born in the United States. Well, I've already introduced the possibility, that the United States is not the whole country. Okay, do you agree?
Wait. Okay.
I have introduced in our earlier discussion that the United States may not be, it could be, but it may not be the whole country.
Right.
All right. But I'm fixing to show you where, and this is the thing you have to understand. When they write code, if they wrote a code that contradicted the Constitution in any way, shape, or form, it is automatically invalid.
Sure.
Right? It's illegal. It's unconstitutional, and it's gone. Right?
Yeah. So when we say that the United States might not be the whole country, just to be clear, we're not saying there might be more to it. We're saying that when we say the words United States, that may not necessarily pertain to everything that is within our geographic borders. Right. Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
And that's something, again, definitions are everything.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is what makes you a United States citizen. All right. So, but here's the key point. A person born in the United States, but look at the last part of that sentence, and subject to the jurisdiction thereof. Well, we've already covered the fact that there is no jurisdiction that covers the entire country. Georgia's sovereign, Alabama's sovereign, Mississippi's sovereign. So how would you be born in Georgia and be under the jurisdiction of something called the United States?
Yeah.
Like, you see what I'm saying?
Yeah. Well,
you couldn't.
Yeah. The way we've described it now, right? Because I think the way people would read that, going back again to the way that people usually think about it, is that the United States is the overlay of the whole thing. So you would kind of inherit up through, like, because I'm a citizen of Georgia, I'm also a citizen of the United States. That's how we think about it. But
correct.
But based on everything that we just got done looking at, that's actually not the way it's wired.
No. Yeah. And here is my explanation. Every person born in the United States, I haven't defined United States yet. I'm fixing to, but I haven't done it yet. But any person born in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof, you cannot take me to court and say that's an illegal code. You can't, because it is completely valid. The question is your understanding of what that's actually saying, but you cannot tell me that's an unconstitutional code section, because it is absolutely perfect.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with that.
Again? What are we looking at?
This is 8 USC 1401, and you can Google it and look at it yourself. I've got the whole, none of this other stuff really matters, because the primary thing is that you have to be under the jurisdiction of the United States in order to be a citizen of the United States. All right. So let's back up and take a look at a couple other things. So here is their definition. This is 26 USC 7408. This is a state citizen. So it says, and this is Title 26. This is income tax stuff. And this is very interesting why they would even have this in here if you just residing in the United States, in the whole country, anywhere, Georgia, Alabama, wherever, why they would do what they're fixing to say right here. So this says citizens and residents outside of the United States. Now, they're wanting you to believe this is talking about going to France. Okay.
Yeah.
But it says, if any citizen or resident of the United States does not reside in and does not have his principal place of business in any United States judicial district, such citizens or residents shall be treated for the purpose of this section as residing in the District of Columbia. Well, now, why in the world would they have something in there like that if they have jurisdiction over the whole country?
Citizen or resident of the United States and does not reside in. So
then we're going to treat you as if you do.
So if you are a citizen of the United States,
okay, and we haven't defined United States yet.
We haven't defined yet, but if you are, then if you don't live in the District of Columbia,
but it's more than that. And United States judicial district.
Yeah.
So you have to be in a district in the judicial district of the United States. Well, if I'm in Georgia, how are you claiming judicial jurisdiction in Alabama?
Yeah, got it.
So, you see what I'm saying?
Right.
So it can only be the District of Columbia that they're talking about here. And again, a perfect definition of the word state citizen. It is not unconstitutional. It is not illegal. It is perfectly written. Your understanding of what it is saying is the subject matter, not whether this is legal or illegal. Okay. So now let's back up and take a look at who is a citizen. Okay. So this is 26, again, income tax stuff, 26 CFR section 1.1-1C. Who is a citizen? It says every person born or naturalized in the United States and subject to its jurisdiction as a citizen. Again, that jurisdictional restriction of who this person is.
There's a little chicken and egg here, though, right? Because it's like, and I was going to say this in one of the previous ones that you two back is it's kind of the way the sentence is written. It's hard to determine whether what they mean is if you're a citizen and subject to the jurisdiction, which would be like two different, like you might be a citizen but not subject to the jurisdiction.
Wait. I want to be specific here. You need to be specific about what they're saying. It says born or naturalized in the United States and subject to its jurisdiction. So it's not subject to any of the state's jurisdiction. It's subject to its jurisdiction.
Yeah,
and the only word
United
they
States
use in
as
the
a singular, as a
exactly
right.
And again, I'm going to clarify this. Right now, I'm giving you room to argue, but in a second, you're going to lose that ability. Okay.
Yeah. Well, the thing that bothers me about this sentence in the previous one, not immediately previous, but two back, is it's not clear from, I know that you've dug into it, but when you just read it, you can't tell. It's kind of a tricky sentence because
it is, but
yeah.
And that's why I say this whole thing's treasonous, because it's purposely written to be confusing.
Are you subject to its jurisdiction by virtue of having been born in the United States, or are there two criteria, one of which is being born and the other is which is being subject to its jurisdiction?
Yeah, but all of this is going to become crystal clear in just a moment.
I did do some work on contracts, by the way, in case you're and that was the kind of stuff that we used to do when we wanted wiggle room, right? I would write, exactly.
Yeah. So now let's look at what. And now I'm going to argue. We were talking about last name, or your name being all caps, and everybody arguing that has special meaning. I'm arguing that has nothing to do with it. My point is that I think this thing I'm about to show you is the thing that they use to trick all of us, and that is the definition of a word person. You believe and I believed before I started doing all this, I believed a person was a human being. It's us, right?
Yeah, sure.
But I want you to look at this is again IRS tax code. I want you to look at what they define a person to be. It is the term person shall be construed to mean and include an individual, a trust, a state, partnership, association, company, or corporation. It is not a human being. These are all fictions.
Could be a human being.
No.
An individual?
No, in law, if it means something, it says something, right? This is a part of law. If it uses the word includes, and it as soon as they use the word includes in law, in anything legal, it immediately excludes anything not included.
Yeah.
Right. So you can't argue that it automatically includes oranges when they don't specifically say.
That, but is individual not a human?
Well, let me ask you a question. Could you have an individual fish?
Sure. Yeah. I mean,
could you have an individual pencil?
Yeah, it's fuzzy.
Did they tell me what kind of individual that they're talking about?
Yeah. I mean, you're right. Because usually in common language, when we say individual and not in context, you would assume that to be a person.
Right. And that's what they want you to do. They want you to make assumptions, because I'm going to give you their definition of an individual here in just a second.
Oh, good.
So they want you to assume you know the definitions of these words. And I'm telling you, do not ever, even a simple word, go look it up. Yeah. Just to be safe, go look it up. All right. So now let's back up. We got person. So this is an individual from Black's Law. So it says an individual as a noun. This term denotes a single person as distinguished from a group or class, and also very commonly a private or natural person. Now, a natural person by definition is us. It's a human being. Okay, a natural person is how you define a human being.
So, so in the previous thing that you were showing me, they used the word individual to help define the word person, and now they're using the word person to define the word individual. Like,
and that's
I don't
what
know about you, but I learned in school you're not supposed to do that.
That's a double. It's a circular reference, and they do it all over the place, like all over the place. They never give you the definition of anything. They give you this bunch of junk. And you're going to understand why, because if they were clear about what they're saying, you would immediately understand you're not supposed to pay income tax. So the way to get you to think you're supposed to pay income tax is to use all these words and then define them in sections that are not in the paragraph that you're reading.
Sure.
You got to go hunt for these paragraphs to find them. That's how they get us to believe that we're supposed to do something that we're in fact not. Now, I also want to point out that this is actually Black's Law definition, because I haven't gotten to the code section that actually defines what an individual is. But you'll notice here that it's also, it says as distinguished from a partnership, corporation. So this is actually could be a fiction or a real person. But it doesn't tell you. It's just an individual. It doesn't tell you what it is unless you have a specific definition to tell you what an individual is. So you're making an assumption that you should never do in law. You should never make an assumption. So let's go back over here and look at Section 5, USC 552A. This is their definition of an individual. Their definition says the term individual means a citizen of the United States or an alien lawfully admitted for permanent residence. Okay. So their term individual means a citizen. Well, we already went through, or actually we haven't gotten to citizen. So let's keep going. All right. So
and
now
we haven't defined United States yet.
No, I've saved that for last because it's the best.
Okay.
So this is a United States person. This is 26 USC 7701 is the primary place that you can find definitions for the IRS. Okay, that's Title 26 is where all that stuff is. A30 United States person. It says the term United States person means a citizen or resident of the United States, a domestic partnership, or a domestic corporation. Okay. So a citizen of or resident of the United States. Well, we already found out a citizen is someone born or naturalized into the United States and under its jurisdiction. Right. That's what a citizen is. And so let's get out of there and let's look at what domestic is, because it used domestic in that definition for a United States person. Domestic, the term domestic, when applied to a corporation or partnership, means, notice they don't say anything about individuals over here. It says a corporate or partnership means created or organized in the United States or under the law of the United States or of any state, unless in the case of a partnership, the secretary provides otherwise regulations. Confusing stuff. They did use the word state in there. So maybe this thing's talking about the several states. We don't really know. Okay. So now let's take a look at the best one yet. The definition in Title 26, 7701, A9, United States defined.
So the first crazy thing about this, how many people, like, raise your hand if you would have guessed that in the tax code there is a definition of the United States?
And that is that was one of my most surprising. But here's the thing:
you would just assume that we know what the United States is. It's the whole
right,
country.
And they don't want you to ever go look. The thing's confusing as hell to go. I mean, like, I get headaches reading through this crap because it's linked all over the place. Yeah. Like, there's nowhere. But here's the thing: United States is defined all throughout the code, not just Title 26. Yeah. And what I'm about to show you is the same definition for all of them. That nowhere do they include anything but what I'm about to show you. Okay. So, United States defined. The term United States, when used in a geographical sense, includes only the states and the District of Columbia. And so you're going to go, hey, I got you. It says states. It must be talking about states of the Union.
Yeah, that would be more. Right? That'd be how.
Okay, but here's the problem. Here's the problem. They actually give you a definition of state too. It's not just the United States, because if they left it like this, you could argue that that's unconstitutional. They didn't do that. They also give you the definition of state.
Wait. Why could you argue that it's unconstitutional?
Because they don't have jurisdiction inside of a state. So how could they pass income tax code and say that anyone in a state has to pay it? Right. So they have to write this code in a way that's confusing as hell for us to go read, but is not unconstitutional. Well, so the Constitution has these people by the balls. They don't want to admit it, and they write all this twisted ass code to keep us confused. Yeah. But they had to write the code to fit the Constitution, otherwise it would be illegal.
Right.
Okay.
And somebody would figure that out, and the charade would be over. Right.
And you also have to remember that they wrote all this code before computers existed. So it was really difficult for people to figure out what the hell they were doing way back when. Now we have the entire thing up on the internet. In fact, I've downloaded it. I told you I was a software engineer. I've downloaded all that stuff onto my computer, and I can search the entire code for a word for whatever it is that I'm looking for to see where all it shows up. Okay.
You have to admire the mental capacity that came up with this shit, though. I mean,
I'm going to tell you right now, these people are evil as hell, but they're brilliant.
Yeah.
Like this deception is so brilliantly laid out that you have to respect it. Like
it's another episode probably, but because you commented once about most of the politicians wouldn't even be able to, lawyers don't even really get it. So somewhere behind all this, there are the people who get it. And
I bet there's not 50 people that have ever written any of this code.
Yeah.
Because they all link together in a way that it kind of makes you feel like there's somebody is actually responsible for putting all this together. There's no way they have, 10,000 different people that are writing all of this code. It's got to be written by.
So the people who benefit from this are the people who thought it up. And now, granted, maybe some of the people who thought it up aren't alive anymore, but somewhere I'm always looking for the thing behind the thing. And so somewhere, but that's maybe for a different.
And well, I mean, consider this, a politician, and this is why a politician would never have a conversation with you about the Constitution. The politician didn't vote on this code section and this definition. No. They voted on a 10,000 page omnibus bill that had this shit embedded in it, and none of the bastards read it.
Well, why would
they had no idea what the hell they just voted on. And everybody likes to come back and then say, oh yeah, but look, it passed through the federal government, therefore it's law.
Yeah.
Well, my argument is well, no, it didn't pass through the federal government because they never read it.
Right.
They didn't sit down and deliberate on what the definition of the United States was.
And if it is law, then the question of where is it law comes into play. All right. So we just determined that the United States is the District of Columbia and.
No, the states and the District of Columbia. And I want to emphasize only.
And I think it's interesting that they said in a geographical sense, as if there's some other sense that, right?
Exactly.
There must be, if you specify.
But here's the logical reason why they did that. Because they want you in your head, because I'll be honest with you, the first time I read this, I thought, well, there's no way. I mean, we have to pay income tax because it clearly says the states. Mm-hmm. Like it says it, right? Yeah. So they wrote it in that way because they want you to think geographically as the continental United States. Yeah. They put states in the District of Columbia. They want you to think that way. Right?
Okay.
But here is the problem.
What's the state in this context?
The term state shall be construed to include the District of Columbia. Now, here's something that is kind of a brain tease for you to entertain. The word include, when you use it, you think that it is inclusionary,
right? Yeah.
But in reality, it is always exclusionary unless you provide a group prior to using the word includes. In other words, if I said the recipe includes, or anywhere I use the word fruit in this recipe, it includes oranges and grapes. Well, you wouldn't go and put strawberries in it because that's not what I'm using when I use the word fruit. I said it includes. So
in contracts, when they want to get around that, they always say including but not limited to. So
exactly. But here's the problem. When you do that and you do not, well, first off, there's a couple things to understand. In law, there is an axiom of law that literally says that anywhere in law, and I have it, but I don't have it in this presentation, but anywhere in law that the word includes is used, it is exclusionary always and only includes the things enumerated.
Right.
So you can't just throw things into a law because then what you're doing is you're opening it up for interpretation.
Right. So I have a couple things on this. I see where you're going, but the first thing is, so the way a person would read this 26 part 10 here, is if you weren't thinking of it in that context, the way you would read this is you would say, oh, well, this is just simply a clause that's meant to say that besides all the other states, the District of Columbia is also supposed to be treated as a state, right? That's what they want you to think. But then the next thing is, but then in that previous one that we read, it said the United States is made up of the District of Columbia and the states. So there, states is plural, which would lead you to believe that there are more than one of them. But when you read the next one that you just did, the states, it looks like there's only one state, the District of Columbia.
Right. And there is, because it's only the District of Columbia.
So,
but here's the problem. Think about this. Think about it this way. The United States includes the District of Columbia.
yeah.
Right? The states, and it only includes the states and the District of Columbia. Right underneath it, they define the definition for state, and they define it as the District of Columbia. Well, why? Why wouldn't they say state is the several states of the Union? Or state or the 50 states of the country? Or state is, why would they add the District of Columbia to the definition of state when the United States already includes the District of Columbia? And if they are going to include the District of Columbia, what else is included? Can I add China?
Yeah.
I mean, can I add?
So this is deliberately written to be misleading. Is basically
it is absolutely absolutely written.
Yeah, the fact that the previous one uses states plural, and then when you come here for the definition, there's only one. I mean,
and I'm going to tell you, every definition of the United States anywhere in there is going to have something about jurisdiction in that definition, and the definitions of states always only say that it includes the District of Columbia. It never says that it includes anything else.
So you're telling me there's no reference in any of this that says the United States is comprised of all of the states that have been, that have joined the Union through whatever in other words, the way I would expect that to be specified would be something like, let's say, that there are certain territories of the United States that are like Puerto Rico or Guam, or Alaska and Hawaii prior to them joining the Union. And so I would expect the definition to say something like the United States for this purpose means only those places that have joined the Union through this formal process and been accepted into the Union, not those other ones that are affiliated through some sort as a protectorate or something like that. But that definition doesn't exist, is what you're saying. Because if that were the case, that'd be a meaningful definition to have, right? It'd be meaningful to have.
Well, here's the problem, though.
Right.
But here's the problem. We're in Title 26. That's income tax. If the federal government could directly tax your property, because you got to consider your enumeration for or your being paid for doing some service, that's your property.
Yeah.
Right. You're giving up your labor for money or whatever it is that you're being given. That is your property, and the federal government does not have the ability to directly tax a citizen of any state. It does not have that capability. There's no taxation clause anywhere in the Constitution, remembering that the Constitution enumerates what they can do.
Right, so
it's not about what they can't do. It gives them the power to do certain things. There's no ability for the federal government to tax a citizen. So by definition, if they define United States to be the whole country, all the several states, it would be unconstitutional. They couldn't do it. So what they rely on is your ignorance and never going to look up that definition and understanding that they're only talking about the District of Columbia.
They pick the word state, which everybody has a common understanding of, I mean.
And the United States.
We are the damn United States. I mean, we learn from grade school.
Right.
We have all these 50 states, or 52 if you ask some politicians in recent memory, 54, whatever it is.
Yeah.
We have 50 states, and altogether they are the United States of America. I mean, it makes perfect sense.